We're moving on to the panel discussion now, which is going to be facilitated by Victoria Mason. Victoria is a wine buyer for the Wine Society in the UK, and she became a Master of Wine in 2024, I think. And I think I mentioned before that she's written an excellent paper, and focusing on this topic. So please chat to her during the afternoon about her findings. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. I think we're missing one of our panelists, but he will be back imminently, Bertie. So as Emma said, I'm a buyer at the Wine Society, a retailer in the UK. But from September, I'll also be leading our climate and nature programme, which is an initiative we launched last year, essentially an annual fund for our growers to support them in the implementation of projects in the vineyard, which are essentially regenerative. And in terms of how we define that, we're talking about projects which are increasing the carbon storage in the soils, improving biodiversity in the vineyards. So as Emma said, I won't have time to go into that now, but again, when we're in the field this afternoon, we will have time to talk, so please do ask me any questions that you have. I'm going to be moderating the discussion now on the economics of regenerative viticulture. We've got a lot to cover in half an hour, but we'll do our best. I'd like to welcome, first of all, for the first time to the stage today, Johan Jordaan, Cellar Master here at Spier. And I'd like to welcome back Caine and Bertie, who will be here imminently to join this discussion. But I'm going to kick off with, he's running in now. I'm going to kick off with a quote from Gabe Brown, the US farmer who has really become a leading light for regenerative agriculture in the States and beyond that. And that quote is that a farm cannot be sustainable, let alone regenerative, unless it is profitable. I clearly don't need to tell you guys that, and there has been a thread running through the conversations today, from Etienne to begin with, to Johan, to Benny just now, talking about the fact that obviously farming systems are enmeshed in their economical environment. So we're going to attempt to tackle that crucial issue of profitability in our discussion. Just very, very briefly, in terms of the research that I did specifically in Stellenbosch 2 years ago. So my paper was looking at investigating the enablers and the barriers to the adoption of regenerative viticulture. The most prominent barriers which emerged, it won't surprise you, therefore, to hear, were economic in nature. And doubting the financial viability of regen is a topic that comes up again and again in conversation with growers. However, at the same time, the joint most prevalent enabler was the economic benefits of regen. So one of the things that we would like to explore and kind of get under the skin in this conversation is understanding how those benefits can be realized while acknowledging that there is usually a transition period in which the economics might be tricky. So for the next 25 minutes or so, that is what we are going to do. I'm going to sit down and take a pew with these guys. But I think I would like to kick off perhaps with Caine, obviously in a very different context to our South African context here. But Caine, you went through the average cost increase of production of the 4 years of your trial and came out with an increase of around 7%. And I just wondered if you could speak to what were the key drivers of that increase in cost.
Yeah, sure. So for us in California, the two main areas of cost differences compared to a conventional system. Number one is the undervine management. So in the conventional side, we're using herbicides, which is fairly cost effective, fairly quick. In the regenerative organic side, we're using undervine till, which is just a lot slower and more additional passes are needed. And then the second piece is around the pest control. So we're using third-party drones to do the biodiversity drops and then also incubating the beneficials. So those two pieces coming together is more expensive initially in the program comparatively to insecticides, because we were doing like 4 of those applications right at the start as we tried to build up the native and natural populations of beneficials in the vineyard. But fast forward now 5 years, like this season, we won't even do a drop for any biocontrol agent. So it was upfront. Those were the biggest differences in the operational costs, those 2 factors that led to the 10% increase in farming costs to start with. And eventually that's down to 7. From the 2024 season, we got that down to about a 5% difference. And our goal is to have regenerative farming to be the same as conventional farming, if not less, is the holy grail in terms of what we're working towards.
Thank you. And Johan, perhaps bringing you in here at this point, because you are managing the budgets across Spier, and that therefore involves looking at the difference of costs from conventional versus organic versus regenerative. So could you speak to what you're seeing? And I know it's early days, but what you're seeing at this stage?
I can make the story like Bertie's. He doesn't really know, and he hasn't reached 2025 goals yet, but it's not a joke. But at Spier, we've been doing this since 2010 on this farm, organic farming on Spier. And the other properties in Paul, Nooit Gedacht, we've been doing it there since 2013. Oh, sorry, 2015. But it's we've seen the drop like everyone has. Less so on the Nooit Gedacht property, maybe because the soils are different. They're more shale soils, whereas here is more granitic sands. We were also a couple of years down the line in learning what we did wrong here to what we can apply on that farm. And I think, I mean, Johan said 3% of what we do is organic. It's because we're all shit scared. We don't want to stick our necks out because this is the current economical environment. And we are too afraid that if we do something different, it might actually come out worse than we are currently operating at. And that's that mindset we have to get rid of. Organic, yes, it is more expensive because we don't allow for too much mechanization in terms of undervine operations. We've done on the Nooit Gedacht property, we've done a lot of that sort of low till, getting rid of weeds and the likes. It works for a while, but it's not the holy grail. Every farm will have a different operation system that has to work for that particular soil type and also for what you've got. Otherwise, you will have to go and buy that bloody piece of equipment, which is also expensive. And on the regenerative side, if you use cattle like we do on the Nooit Gedacht property and this property here, Spier, if you're doing it properly, you can offset the cost of the cattle into selling it off as meat. So if you're looking at, and this is now boardroom speak, but if you're looking at KPIs per hectare, not just on the expense side, but also on the income side, we're always looking at farms on a horizontal level. We just look at it at a surface level. Okay, granted, we can't sell under soil, but I mean, there was topsoil farming being done in the Swartland way back where people sold off their topsoil, which gave them a lot of money. We're not going to go there. But if you've got cattle on the farm, you can sell meat. So the Dexters, I mean, Benny's probably the proponent of the Dexter Federation, if there is something like that. But you get Dexter steaks. He's selling Dexter steaks. So so it's about this whole holistic environment where you need look at the expenses of it, but also at the income of it. The cattle is going to be there for 12 years, but it doesn't have to be one cattle for 12 years. It can be 5 or 6 cattle, and you've sold them off for meat. But essentially, it will be more expensive. You just have to figure out what you have to do and what you need to do. They're not the same, though.
Maybe to that point around diversified income streams, that's a perfect segue into Bertie, because I guess in what you described is this holistic farming system where you can't actually look at any individual component and what it drives from a profitability perspective on its own. But how do you, so that sort of layering, I think it can be called, or stacking of enterprises, how do you manage that at the top level to ensure that you are delivering profitability and year on year?
Is it on? Yeah, it's on. Yeah, so see, now my financial guy is here, so I can, I have a bit of a problem. Yeah, it's, I think it's, when I forgot to say, when I was speaking to Prof. Barbara and everyone, I went to see Benny, And I think he was the only guy then back in 2012, 13, when we went to the farm that actually engaged with me and said, it all makes sense. And Benny, yeah, still thanks for that. It's many years ago, but yeah, it was just good to have that conversation with someone that actually also thinks it can work. But I remember in that discussion, Benny, we were talking about chickens, and Angus was already going with it and so on. And you sent me sums, and I told Benny, yeah, but the manure is going to be lekker in the vineyards. It's going to work. And he said, yeah, but can I tell you one thing? You're not going to farm chickens for the manure. And that was like another thing that I realized that we had this discussion around the fire the other night there in the veld where, you know, that saying, it says, jack of all trades and master of none. But nobody knows that it goes on to say is oftentimes better than master of one. And I think the problem with the systems is that we all learn from a very young age that you need to specialize. And I think the challenge with this whole farming system is it's very long, it's super long. So you have to deep down understand where you want to be in 10, 20 years. It gets super hard when you have to explain to other people the process. Maybe it's not profitable this year. You have to say, yeah, but remember we didn't sell any cattle because we kept them all back. You have to say, yeah, we're planning to in 10 years make this type of wine, so I want to let the vineyard go in this direction. And it is super, super long. And I mean, the biggest challenge for me has always been that you need to finance the long with the short, but then you have to give up something. So the whole time you have to like move a bit forward, move a bit back. I mean, you need money now, you sell your calves. Okay, now nice, it looks good on the papers. But now you don't have enough calves to really give you the energy to run the next year's organic maize crop off. So now you're going to pay next year, but now at least it shows that the cattle is making money or whatever. So then the other thing is if you want to farm this way, it's super tough to stay in the commodity market because, for instance, I don't need to tell that to wine people, but I mean, let's say in organic wheat, even though we sell organic wheat flour, which is crazy because we're the only guys in South Africa that do it, it makes no financial sense. And if you don't sell it, then you have to go back to the co-op. First of all, the fallback to commodity prices, which we sometimes have to do, is massive. Secondly, they tell you, the protein isn't what it should be, so you get a butter or whatever, lower price. Then they say, but it's actually dirty, so we need to clean it, and we're going to charge you the cleaning cost. And then you lose that, which is now a waste product of the farm. So somebody else throws it away. So suddenly, you know, all that things, when you go back to commodity, just because you have to treat the short on a financial term, everything is out of place. Suddenly the pigs don't have enough feed, etc. So it's so difficult to say on a financial terms, you know, because every decision you take is some cost in some sense. It can be an externality that you can't even, you know, explain on a paper or whatever. But yeah, it's in this like Johan says with the cattle. I mean, it makes no sense to have a Dexter, in my opinion, in a vineyard and then not sell it as a steak with your bottle of wine. But I mean, if you want to sell it as a steak, where are you going to work it? Who's going to butcher it? And again, the guys that are butchering in South Africa have been doing it for 25, 30 years. They're experts. Now suddenly you want to do it and you want to compete with these guys and put the same, you know, our steak is probably going to be a bit leaner. The fat's going to be more yellow. You're going to have to chew it a bit. It's probably going to be cut a bit skew or something. And now, you know, suddenly you put that next to each other on a plate, and it's a long process. And what's interesting for me is that Cape Town is ready, and Joburg is not ready. And South Africa, that's insane, the difference. Yeah, so what you can deliver in Cape Town, and the chefs want to work with it, and they want to do something interesting. In Joburg, it's not at all like that, but yeah.
So actually, maybe that takes us on to markets. And I think in your presentation earlier, you also referred to having to create a market for your product and having to educate or at least engage consumers in what it is that you're doing. Caine, you mentioned the end price that you were able to get, I think, in Whole Foods for your ROC certified wine.
Yeah.
Can you talk us through sort of how you got to that and what that was as an increase on the previous price?
Yeah, sure. So I think at the end of the day, all of this needs to economically make sense. And so if we can run our vineyards at around about a 5 to 7% increase in farming costs, that doesn't mean that loss goes to the bottom line. What we've been able to do is increase increase the sales price of our wines, not only at a retail level, but also at a DTC level at our wineries from a direct-to-consumer perspective, so at our tasting rooms, at our wine club. And we've been able to increase price by but anywhere between 20 and 30%, depending on the wine range. And in some cases, introduce a completely new product to kind of rebrand and reposition, still under the parent brand of Robert Hall or Ramsgate. And what we've found is that there's a consumer out there that's really willing to pay for it. And there's not a lot of these regenerative wines or organic wines out there in the marketplace. In the Whole Foods example, that vineyard was traditionally going into $15 US dollars a bottle Cabernet Sauvignon in retail across the country, being special down to like $12.99. Margins weren't great, honestly, and this whole transition into regenerative farming has mean we've been able to come out now with a wine that sits above that, same vineyard, same fruit. We're doing a little bit of extra oak work in regards to slightly newer barrels, but we've been able to come in at a price point of like $30 a bottle versus $15. It gets special down to like $25. That's a huge margin add across those 10,000 cases, and that 10,000 cases are the 12 bottle cases. So it's a lot of wine for us going into key markets. So my point is that there's a willing consumer out there that's starting to catch on to regenerative viticulture and agriculture, and it's not just the wine industry. Other agricultural industries are helping tell this story for us. So the consumer's getting educated around it. And so they're starting to search out these wines. And same with some of the buyers now within on-premise and retail and wholesale, they're starting to search for these wines. So if you have it and you're talking about it, you've got the ability to start increasing pricing. And I think you should all pat yourselves on the back here, and I would encourage you all to start talking about what you're doing here, because it's phenomenal. I mean, I've spent 3 days touring some of these estates, and what you guys are doing, it's right up there with some of the best practices I've seen in the world. I think cattle-wise, what you're doing, no one else touches what you're doing here. So the opportunity for regenerative farming for the South African wine industry, I think you guys could lead the world in this a lot quicker than a lot of other wine regions.
And Johan, you and I had a conversation last week, and we were talking about markets, I guess, also beyond your domestic market. What is your take on the demand for wines made in this way?
I think it's definitely increasing, as Caine has said. So our typical sort of channel is more European. South Africa to the States is a good market, but not for most people. And the laws are slightly different for organic in the States. Wine made without sulfur, as opposed to wine grown or wine made from vines grown organically. So our wines might not travel that well, so we're not attacking that market massively. But the UK, which is our traditional market, we find that, like Waitrose, where you were at, Whole Foods as well in the UK, these people are looking at these types of wines. But what often is for us a stumbling block is certification. So where you've got the regenerative organic certification is available. A lot of us, as it was mentioned earlier, is over fatigued with audits. South Africa is being audited like you can't believe on anything. And latching on to Caine for the moment, the whole WETA thing with the Ethical Trading Association, Wine Industry Ethical Trading Association, where we look at the socioeconomics, I think we're the world ahead with that, like decades ahead. But we tend to hyper-focus so much on things that we forget that we must sell the wine. So going into rooms with people like yourselves in your former job, that's where we try to make the difference. We need to talk to the gatekeepers, which is the wine buyers. Very often the consumer is there, but they're not being exposed because the gatekeeper has a certain set of parameters that must be met, but predominantly price. And being from South Africa, we always start negotiating from the bottom upwards, never from the top down. And that's something that we need to change as a collective. I mean, if Tyrrell and it goes with Vintners, it's got 3 brands under the umbrella. He's just got 3, but let's take Spier with as an example. It's an example. Now you got a 2 million case business that can start to negotiate for the country, not just for ourselves. So I think the demand is there, definitely. We're just too fragmented in our approach. So if we use our equivalent in South Africa, and this is my view for the moment, our equivalent of regenerative agriculture in South Africa started way back when we created the IPW system. So integrated pest production or integrated production of wine in South Africa is also a world leader. The OIV has taken excerpts of this. New Zealand has taken everyone takes excerpts of the IPW system and then improves on that, and that's the new standard. I was just sending Conrad a note this morning. I think we should rebrand IPW just to regenerative agriculture with different grades of success. And that's an easier story to tell than just IPW, because we've been having that seal on that bottle for so long, and no one bloody gets it. You know, it's we're world years ahead.
Yeah, totally agree.
So I get emotional. You must.
No, it's a really good point. I mean, that's the holy grail. If you can work with a national body and then collectively come together and really define what those terms are and build on the great work that's been done, that's how you lead the whole world in regenerative ag. And you guys have the opportunity to do that and really create a lot of noise, which in turn drives the South African wine brand all over the world, whether that's retail, on-premise, visitation to your beautiful estates here. So that's, that's right on point.
I think also to that point, I mean, what we often do in South Africa is, again, it's the hyper-focus. So we've got this monoculture vineyard farms where it's either inherited or you've built it yourself, and now you've become so ingrained and so intertwined with all the emotion. The farmers are emotional beings. I mean, you can't negotiate that away, but it's about just broadening your mind and how you can pull back on that old vines that's not really doing something for you other than being an old vineyard. If you can replant that to something different, to a different varietal, if you have the money to do that, we also know that, or maybe create a sort of a diversified environment on your farm. I think that in the end is the bigger win for the whole ecology of let's say the region of Stellenbosch. I mean, there's a lot of natural vegetation here. But if you go to a place where I grew up, and this is not stepping on anyone's act, so please don't kill me. But if you go to Rawsonville, where I grew up, which is 80 kilometers from here, it's a monoculture environment. It's flat predominantly, and it's just vineyard, and it's sad actually. So I mean, what I see on this farm here, just on Spier, there's much more birds of prey. Okay, we had the sanctuary here, so that helps, but there's a lot more wildlife and birds on this farm than there is in the whole bloody valley of Rawsonville. That's where I grew up. I'm proud to be from there, but we need to change things for the better. Moet nie op die spot sit nie.
Reading that quote there on the board from that Benny put up there, and you're saying that there's a market, but from a production point of view, from a farmer point of view, I don't see any pull from the market to be organic or regenerative or whatever. People change their behavior because of what happened to them. But I promise you, the success stories of people selling large volumes at high prices of organic or regenerative or whatever you want it's not there. People say it's there, but you can't show me on price point that you said as well. It's always the lowest. So there's a pool, there's a market for organic wine or regenerative or whatever, but it's always at the bottom end. And one important thing that I've seen in all of these slides and on every single photo is that magical black line that runs through all those rows of vineyards that gives water. And that is a different ballgame from the guys in the Swartland that receives 300 millimeters of rain and have bush vines, and where those cattle will destroy the vines within the first half hour. And you can't graze and grow it like that. I'm not saying I'm using an excuse like Johan said, there's a million excuses. But I'm just thinking, it's all of these case studies and all of these success stories have that magical black line that is, as in the sense of Pastor Robles, pumped from a non-renewable source, which I don't think is a sustainable way of doing viticulture. It's just something that I pick up as horses for courses, but I don't see a massive drive or pull from the market to encourage farmers or producers to go balls to the wall and do this. Because farmers in South Africa, they're adaptive. They can do it. And if there's a financial gain for them to have from that, I promise you there will be hundreds of guys that will change. I know a lot of farmers that will change and have the ability to do that and the adaptability. But there's not enough financial pool gain for them at volume in order for them to do it. It's just a remark.
Yeah, I got to think, and again, this is how I see the world. I think for the moment, there's no the reality on the farm is different to the reality in the market. I agree, but I think there will become a point, and South Africans are used to this type of abuse from the world markets, is that at some point the markets will just tip and say, this, it has to be like this, or we're not buying your wine. Sit here.
I know, because I'm meant to be speaking in like 2 minutes' time, and whether I've got the time to say this or not, I don't know. But one of the things we're trying to do at the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation is try to help drive that demand. So we're sitting in there, we're talking, so Victor and I both used to be at Waitrose, so we're talking to Waitrose, we're talking to Whole Foods, we're talking to System Belaget, we're talking to SAQ, LCBO. We're trying to help educate and collate these stories and trying to help them understand how they can create that demand, the impact that they can have, ideally without relying on certifications, because we all know that that is a onerous burden. So that is one of the big things that we're trying to achieve this year at the RVF, is to help sort of create that tipping point. I'm going to stop talking, it's not my session.
I could see you were wiggling in your seat. Caine,
and with the
The most important thing you said there is without certification. I had this chat with Jamie Good a few years ago when he was one of the panelists at the Chenin Blanc Congress as well. The people making these rules for the certification, they are not dependent. Their kids to go to university and school is not dependent on the farming of that producer. So they make the rules and put up all these bars that a producer must reach in order to sell the wine. So it's being forced down on this producer, but it's mainly not realistic. So if you can have, and that I think that's why IPW have been so successful and why it's been taken on by everyone. Because it wasn't something that was pushed down your throat. It was something as an incentive to help you put better systems in place, to be more effective on your property, and maybe to think about a few things, because there was a few categories that you might have not thought about.
It's what benefits principles, not rules.
Yes.
But then how do we translate that into retail and consumer, where they need to not be accused of greenwashing? So it's how do we create that intersection in the middle that is credible, credible enough to be, it's complicated enough to be credible, but simple enough to be communicable. And it's just that little sweet spot in the middle.
Yeah, I'd say just on that certification path, there are global retailers that have outlined a number of certifications that they are aligned to in regards to that they'll accept. And I'd encourage you to look into two of them that don't have organic as the baseline. One is Regenerified, one is certified regenerative. And the beauty of those is that they are grower-based systems. So basically you write your own farm plan and you submit that based on the implementation of regenerative practices that you're doing for your site and for your region specifically, and they audit to that, and they want to see like continuous improvement, of course, but organics is not the baseline, but it does give you a certified seal that's third-party audited that you can put on packaging, primary, secondary, that the key retailers are recognizing. Because the big risk in this space is that every man and his dog says they're regenerative, because they'll put a cover crop in, and then no real change happens, and everyone's talking that they're regenerative, and nothing really moves forward. So I think personally, there's a space for verification and certification, but it's got to meet farmers where they are. It's got to be context specific. It's got to be regional specific, grower specific, and those two programs, I really encourage you to look into them, because you can get certified within a year. Every person that we've visited the last 3 days, no problem could get certified under certified regenerative. And it's a global certification recognized across food groups that can go into retail anywhere in the world that is recognizable. And it's not just wine telling that story. It's beef, it's eggs, it's other value-added products, olive oil.
And I suppose it's also worth thinking about when we're looking at routes to market, what is that final endpoint of sale? If it's a large multinational retailer, a supermarket, the demands and requirements are very different from smaller independent retail or from on-trade, on-premise, where the relationship with it's almost a sort of large to large and medium-sized businesses, and there we go down. The relationship with our consumers, for example, is more interpersonal, is more on the human level. So we can actually also share the stories of our growers, because as buyers, we're on the road visiting our growers. So those certifications and that kind of stamp of approval in a supermarket setting where your only tool of selling is the shelf is sort of very difficult to get around. But that is just one route to market, and it's not appropriate for all the growers within the ecosystem of any wine industry, and certainly within the South African wine industry as well. But it's complex, and we are not going to solve it, and we've definitely run out of time, and we need to give Anne the chance to present on the One Block Challenge before we rush for the buses. So I think I'd just like to say thank you for a brief touching of the surface, and we'll no doubt continue conversations in the vineyard later.